In the spring of 1467, a man walked out of his burning temple and sat down in the rubble. He was 73 years old. Behind him, the temple he had helped restore, its meditation halls, its scroll rooms, its old wooden pillars worn smooth by decades of monks passing through, was on fire. He sat. He watched the smoke. He did not run. He did not weep. He did not call out. He simply sat in the ash of something beautiful and watched it burn. His name was Ikkyū Sōjun, and he had been preparing for exactly this moment for 50 years. The war that burned his temple had been building for longer than that. It is called the Ōnin War, from the name of the imperial era in which it started. But the roots of it went back generations. On one side, Hosokawa Katsumoto, 36 years old in 1467, deputy shogun, one of the most powerful men in Japan, lean, precise, politically brilliant. He had spent his life accumulating influence so carefully that he had made enemies simply by being too capable. On the other, Ōnin Sōjun, 63 years old, known throughout Japan as the Red Monk, because he had taken Buddhist vows as a young man and then proceeded to spend the next 4 decades largely ignoring them. He commanded a quarter of the provinces in all of Japan. He had fought in wars, taken losses, rebuilt, and fought again. He had been fighting in one form or another for as long as anyone could remember. These two men, one patient, one relentless, had been circling each other for years. In 1467, they stopped circling. The fires began in Kyoto's northern quarter in the first month of the year. By summer, the city, which had stood for nearly 700 years, which had served as the capital of Japan, which contained the imperial palace and 200 temples and the accumulated craftsmanship of a civilization, was mostly ash. The war would last 11 years. Both men would die before it ended, and through all of it, in the rubble of his burned temple, an old monk sat and waited. To understand what Ikkyū was waiting for, you have to understand who he was. He was born in 1394 in Kyoto. His mother was a lady of the imperial court. His father, it was widely understood at the time, was Emperor Go-Komatsu. Though this was never officially acknowledged, the emperor had enemies. So when Ikkyū was still an infant, his mother was sent from the palace, and the child was given to a temple school to be raised as a monk. He was 5 years old. He spent the next 10 years learning to read, write, and copy sutras. He was, by all accounts, extraordinary at it. His teachers noticed early that this was not a child absorbing information. He was interrogating it. At 14, he left the temple school and began to study under a series of masters. The one who changed him was named Ikkyū Sōjun, a severe, uncompromising Rinzai Zen teacher who lived at a small hermitage on the shores of Lake Biwa. Under Ikkyū spent years working on a single koan. He was not permitted to speak of the koan. He was not permitted to explain his progress. He sat with it in the dark, in the cold, in the thick summer heat of the lake. He sat with it when he was certain he understood it, and again when that certainty dissolved, and again when nothing at all remained. He did not find an answer. He found the question dissolving into something he could not name. In 1420, he was 26 years old. He was sitting on a small boat at night on Lake Biwa when a crow called in the darkness. That was it. He later wrote that the sound went through him like a needle through cloth. He understood something, not a concept, not a doctrine, not something he could explain or transmit or write down in a way that would survive the explanation. Something that was already there, underneath everything, that no amount of war or burning could touch. Ikkyū confirmed his understanding and offered Ikkyū formal Zen transmission. the document that would make him an officially recognized master, with a lineage he could claim and pass on. Ikkyū received it. Then he set it aside. He said later that the document was a piece of paper and that a piece of paper had nothing to do with what he had found on the lake. His fellow students were not pleased. Ikkyū left anyway. For the next 40 years he wandered. He did not found a school. He did not build a monastery. He did not settle into any of the official positions that a monk of his ability and lineage would naturally have been given. He wrote poetry. He played the shakuhachi flute. He spent time in the company of fishermen and merchants and outcasts, and people the established temples would not receive. He was known in certain circles as Kyun, crazy cloud, and he developed a reputation that was difficult to categorize. He was not a hermit, he was not a court monk, he was not safe, but people came to him, the powerful and the desperate alike, because something about him was obvious from the moment you sat across from him. He had found the thing. Whatever the thing was, he had it, and he would give it to you, or rather, he would point at it and let you decide what to do. In 1467, the fires started. Daitoku-ji, the great temple complex in northern Kyoto, where Ikkyū had roots, where several of his teachers had practiced and died, burned. Ikkyū sat in the ash, and word reached both warlords separately that the old monk was there, among the wreckage. Sitting, Hosokawa Katsumoto sent a messenger first. The message was simple. He wished to know the correct path forward, not a question of strategy. He had generals for that. He wanted to know, in the language of the Dharma, whether what he was doing was right, whether his cause was just, whether the sacrifice would be worth it. The messenger returned with a small slip of paper. On it, Ikkyū had written 3 characters in his large, deliberate brushwork. The messenger could not interpret them. Katsumoto read them. He was quiet for a long time. Then he dismissed everyone in the room. Yamana Sōjun sent a messenger 3 weeks later. The old general, ill now, rarely leaving his camp, sensing on some deep level that the years were running short, wanted something different. He wanted absolution. The decades of fighting, the lives taken, the temples burned. He wanted a monk to tell him it had meaning, that it had been worth it. His messenger came back with a small slip of paper, the same 3 characters, written in the same unhurried hand. Sōjun stared at it for a long time. He did not dismiss the room. He asked his aide, "What does it mean?" The aide did not know. Sōjun held the paper for the rest of the night. Both men died in 1473. In the same year, the war they had started continued without them for 4 more years before it simply exhausted itself. Kyoto was left in ruins. Ikkyū lived until 1481. He spent his final years helping rebuild Daitoku-ji. Stone by stone, timber by timber, he raised the funds, he organized the labor, he wrote letters to patrons across Japan who had money and, perhaps more importantly, guilt. He was 86 years old when the main hall reopened. He walked through it slowly. Then he sat down. And in the manner of a man who had been sitting his whole life, he became very still. Here is what was written on the paper. 3 characters. In the tradition of Ikkyū's teaching, they were not an instruction. They were a mirror. The characters, read in the old Japanese, translate to, "You are it." 3 words. The thing you are fighting for, the honor, the lineage, the name, the land, you believe it exists out there, beyond the wall, across the river, in the province your enemy holds, in the outcome that will finally prove you were right. But Ikkyū's answer, the same answer to both men, because the question beneath both questions was identical. is that the thing each man was trying to protect did not live out there. It lived in the one who was asking. The Buddha nature, what the Zen tradition calls busshō, the original awakened quality that requires no acquisition and admits no destruction, was not in the temple. It was never in the temple. The monks who fled the burning of Daitokuji thought they were leaving something behind. They were not. You cannot burn what was never assembled. You cannot defend what was never threatened. You are it now. Why does this matter to you? You are not a medieval Japanese warlord. You are not fighting over provinces in a ruined city. But the war Hosokawa and Yamana were fighting, the real war, underneath the armies and the fire, was not about land. It was about the terror of having been wrong, of having given decades of life to something that turned out to be smaller than imagined, of being, after all the effort, after all the sacrifice, still uncertain whether any of it had been enough. That war does not require a sword. It runs, for most people, as a quiet undercurrent beneath everything, beneath the career decisions and the relationship patterns and the 3 a.m. convictions that something has gone permanently wrong. You have been fighting some version of it for a long time, longer probably than you know, and Ikkyū's 3 characters are for you as much as they were for the generals. Not because you need to stop fighting, but because you need to see what you were fighting for. The outcome, the approval, the proof. Look at it directly. Then look at the one who wants those things, not the wanting, the one behind the wanting. Sit with that for a moment. If you can find that one, if you can locate the thing that is watching the wanting, you will notice something. It is not worried. It was never worried. It has been sitting in the ash of everything that burned and waiting patiently for you to remember it was there. You are it. Ikkyū Sōjun died on the 19th day of the 11th month of 1481. He was 87 years old. According to the monks who were with him at the end, his final words, or close to his final words, were not a verse or a dharma teaching. They were a plea. Don't die. He said it to his disciples because he loved them, because he knew what would happen when he was no longer there to point at the thing. That is the paradox at the center of Ikkyū's life. He had found the thing that was beyond all loss, and he still grieved. He still loved. He still, when asked to choose between the absolute and the particular, between the open sky and the faces of the people in front of him, chose both. That is what the teaching actually looked like, not detachment, presence, full, ordinary, unremarkable presence, in the ash, in the rubble, in the rebuilt hall, in the room where a man sits down with a brush and writes 3 characters to someone who is, in some way he cannot explain, already home. In the main hall of Daitokuji, rebuilt from the ruins of the Ōnin War, there is a room that Ikkyū used for calligraphy in his final years. It is small. The light comes in from one side. And somewhere in that room, perhaps in the memory of the floorboards or the angle of the morning light, there is the image of a man who sat down, took a brush, and wrote the same answer twice. Not to instruct, not to correct, simply to leave, on paper, what he had found on a lake in the dark when he was 26 years old, when a crow called and everything became very simple. You are it. Written to a general at war, written to a general dying, written now to you.